All right, let's jump right into this ancient text from the book of Hosea. It's a powerful and honestly a surprisingly modern story. It's all about hitting rock bottom, being completely and utterly broken, and then somehow finding a way back. It's a journey that starts in a really, really dark place.
Wow, what an image to start with, right? Dr. John Oswalt just paints this incredible picture. This isn't some story about a distant, angry God pointing a finger. No. This is about a God who shows up at the absolute lowest moment, not to rub it in, but with one single, powerful purpose: to buy back what was lost.
So yeah, that's where our story begins, on the slave block. This is stage one, where the nation of Israel has just completely imploded, and the text is crystal clear about something. This was no accident. This wasn't just bad luck. Their own choices, their own actions, brought them to this point of total ruin. Now, to really get how serious this is, we got to understand this keyword: iniquity. You might hear that and think, oh, that's just a fancy word for sin. But it's so much more than that. It's not just about making a mistake. Imagine you punch a hole in a wall. The punch is over in a second, but the hole is still there. That's iniquity. It's a real physical tear in the fabric of reality that's now sitting between them and God, and it has to be dealt with.
So you're probably thinking, okay, you've hit rock bottom. The answer is obvious. Just turn around, right? Well, it's not that simple, and that's what's so fascinating here. The text shows us there's a much deeper problem, something broken on the inside that makes turning back feel almost impossible.
So what is it? What's the deal? If God is right there, calling them back, why can't they seem to hear him? Why can't they respond? This is the core question the book of Hosea really digs into, this profound internal brokenness.
And the text actually lays out three huge internal roadblocks. First up, plain old arrogance. That voice inside that says, I'm fine, I don't need to change. Second, their own actions have literally trapped them. They've built their own prison. And then there's this third one, and it's pretty intense. The text calls it a spirit of prostitution, which is this twisted preference for things that are toxic and broken over things that are pure and good. And Dr. Oswalt gives us this absolutely perfect modern analogy for what's happening. Think of God as a radio station, constantly broadcasting a message of love 24/7. This signal is strong. The problem isn't the broadcast. The problem is that they've taken their radio and smashed it to pieces. The message is still out there, but they've made themselves completely incapable of tuning in. So, how in the world do you fix a smashed receiver? Where do you even begin to heal from that kind of damage? Well, the answer the text gives is surprisingly simple, but also incredibly profound. It all starts with one single conscious action. This is it. This is the instruction. It's not bring a sacrifice or make some grand gesture. It's simply take words with you. The entire journey back to wholeness begins with speech. But, and this is a huge but, we're not talking about cheap words or empty promises here.
And this is where it gets really, really cool. The Hebrew word here for word is dabar. And dabar doesn't just mean a word, like the ones I'm saying now. It also means thing, an event. So in the Hebrew worldview, when you speak a word of genuine, heartfelt confession, you're not just saying something. You are creating a new reality. You're bringing a new thing into existence that has to be dealt with. This is reality-altering speech.
In fact, the text basically hands them the script. It's a three-step process. Step 1, you gotta face reality. Forgive our iniquity. Own the hole you punched in the wall. Step 2, don't you dare act like you deserve anything. Appeal to pure grace. Receive us graciously. And step 3, make a promise for the future. We will offer the fruit of our lips. It's the whole package.
Okay, so they take that first step. They say the words. Now what? What's God's response going to be? Well, this is where the story takes a surprising turn, because it's not just about getting a pardon. It's about something way, way deeper. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of it. God doesn't just say, I'll heal what you did. He says, I will heal their waywardness. See the difference? He's not just treating the symptom, the bad choices. He's going straight to the root cause, that internal desire to stray, that spirit of prostitution. He's healing the very thing that made them wander off in the first place. Now that is real restoration.
But why should they trust a God who promises this? I mean, really? The answer is found in his character. The text reveals he's a God who has a special compassion for the fatherless, the outcasts, the people on the margins, the ones who can't contribute anything. Think about it. Earthly powers, man-made idols, they only value you for what you can give them.
This God values you just because you exist, and that's what makes him completely and utterly trustworthy.
And if you think this whole fatherless idea is just some dusty ancient concept, you need to see this. Dr. Oswalt points to a modern statistic that is, well, it's jaw-dropping. In the United States, the percentage of babies born without a father in the home jumped from 5% in 2009 to 50% in 2022. Let that sink in for a second. This text's focus on the most vulnerable among us has never been more relevant than it is right now.
So this book doesn't end with a simple, and they all lived happily ever after. Instead, it ends with a choice. It leaves you at a fork in the road. It presents two fundamentally different ways to walk through life, and it all boils down to one single question. Where do you place your trust?
On one side, you've got the path of trusting in the works of our hands, our modern idols, right? Our careers, our bank accounts, our achievements. Dr. Oswalt points out this path always leads to anxiety, to grasping for more, and it ultimately makes us untrustworthy. Then there's the other path, trusting God as the ultimate source of everything, and that path leads to a totally different place, to gratitude, to peace, and it actually frees us up to become trustworthy people ourselves. And this whole book really has been painting a picture of what that second path, the ways of the Lord, actually looks like. It's a way defined by a God who is completely trustworthy, who is self-giving love, who lets us experience the consequences of our choices, yes, but who is always ready to restore us the moment we turn back, and whose ultimate driving desire is simply to bless.
So the book closes with this final verse, which isn't really a conclusion, it's a challenge. It says God's ways are right. For some people, they're a clear, smooth path to walk on. For others, that same path is a stumbling block, the very same road. The question it leaves hanging in the air for them and for us is a personal one. Which path will you walk?